Hello everyone, I do hope that you're all well. I'm the introverted astrologer, and today I'm bringing you a video which covers the ongoing Mars-Pluto oppositions. We experienced the first one at the beginning of November, and since then the situation with Russia has deteriorated. We have seen a few signs of conflict in the returns that I've covered for the United States before. And as you know, Joe Biden recently authorised Ukraine to fire long-distance American missiles into Russian territory. The UK also shifted its stance and joined in. Now, is this situation going to get worse, or will it die down? I personally suspect that we're entering difficult territory now, so let me show you some of the charts. Let's kick this off by looking at the solar return for the United States. This is based on the Sibley chart, America's independence chart, and we are looking at the time that the Sun returned to the exact same position it was on the 4th of July 1776. The period of this solar return takes us through to July of 2025. One of the noteworthy things about this solar return is the fact that we have a Uranus and Mars conjunction in the 7th house. When we're speaking about a country, the 7th house refers to its foreign relationships with other countries, and Uranus and Mars together are speaking of quite explosive, potentially violent energy. To have this potential with other countries is very possibly showing a breakdown in any kind of international diplomacy. As you can see, this Mars is very tightly conjunct that descendant, and so to have this kind of angry energy, which does often herald conflict, in the 7th house is a bit unfortunate. We can also see that the ascendant of this solar return falls in the 12th house of the United States, the 12th house where we find hidden things, secrets, and possibly misfortune. Now, the American people are very much highlighted in this return because we would always look at the moon to see how the people of a country are getting along. And we can see here that this moon is at 29 degrees of Gemini, exactly square to Neptune. This is a combination that I'd also picked up in the Mars planetary return, and I think it's highlighting some great concern of the American people. Some of that could already be in place anyway because of the outcome of the general election. Roughly half of the states was going to be unhappy with the outcome, no matter which way it went. But another thing which is showing why the American people are so emphasised this year is because the American natal moon is at around 27 degrees of Aquarius, and so we can see that it would fall here on the IC of the chart. And so I think this year that the American people are going to be perhaps confused, at a loss. I also wanted to show you where Ukraine is at the moment. Here we have the Ukraine national chart in the centre, and placed around the outside against the pale blue background we have the positions of its solar return, and this spans a period from 23rd of August 2024 through to the 23rd of August next year. It's quite striking that the solar return angles are roughly lining up with the natal chart, and so we can see that Pluto is again on the solar return midheaven. The solar return Mars is still showing ongoing conflict with that square to Saturn and Venus simultaneously. So we have this T-square going on, showing the strife, the contraction, the discontent. We have Chiron on the nation's moon, and so we know the people are really suffering. But this solar return is also drawing to our attention some of the transits that Ukraine will be going through next year too. And so Pluto will be conjuncting Ukraine's Saturn again on and off almost all year. Moreover, we know that Saturn is moving through Pisces at the moment, and as it moves further into Pisces next year, somewhere around April time, it will begin to oppose Ukraine's natal Mars. This will be an ongoing transit, continuing right through until the end of the year. Transiting Uranus too is going to begin edging into very early Gemini next year. This means that it is going to begin a square with Ukraine's sun. A square which won't initially become exact until July of 2025. And this is showing changes and stresses to Ukraine's national identity, potentially to its ruler too, which at the moment is Zelensky. And at this point I'd like to start talking about an eclipse that we'll be experiencing next springtime. This eclipse energy is very physical, and so accidents, sudden upsetting events, violence potentially, are all possible. The solar eclipse falls at 9 degrees of Aries, and the lunar eclipse falls at 24 degrees of Virgo. I will put the details of this up on the screen. If this was an eclipse that was to affect you personally, then the advice would be to do what you enjoy, but to take care. However, when eclipses affect a country, the consequences can last a little bit longer than if it were to impact your natal chart. And so the fact that this eclipse is going to also pull in Ukraine's natal Mars is somewhat concerning. Mars can speak about a nation's desire to go out and get the things they want for themselves by asserting their will, just as it would do on a personal level. But it also says a lot about a country's levels of violence, and also its soldiers, its military capacity, its fighting forces. As if the impact of this eclipse wasn't enough, we have another concern, which is that transiting Pluto is affecting Ukraine's Saturn. But we're also having a Mars retrograde cycle. Mars is currently edging through the early degrees of Leo. It's reaching the area of the American North Node, and it's very shortly going to go retrograde. This means that it will oppose transiting Pluto and the Ukrainian Saturn again and again. So by 7th of December Universal Time, Mars will have reached around 6 degrees of Leo and will appear to start moving backwards. And the further into December we go, the closer this reversing Mars will come to opposing transiting Pluto again. By the end of December, it will certainly be within a degree of orb, and it will be exact in early January. Now, this Pluto-Mars potential for violence is huge, and so this retrograde cycle is something that astrologers have been looking at all year. But you can see here how strongly it impacts the Ukrainian chart. Mars will carry on reversing until it gets to around 17 degrees of Cancer. You can see its impact on Ukraine's ascendant, its opposition to the North Node. Remember, a country's 7th house is speaking of its relationships with other countries, and so having Mars right on the cusp of your 7th house is certainly saying something about the capacity for violence and conflict. It's escalating, and as Mars turns direct on the 24th of February, its speed will be slower, but it will carry on inching back to early Leo, and in that movement it will oppose transiting Pluto yet again, and of course the Ukrainian Saturn. This last opposition is exact in late April, so we have quite a few things unfolding already in the springtime of next year, because we have the eclipse in March. We're going to have this Mars-Pluto opposition unfold twice more, and we do also have quite a difficult new moon coming in the spring, which I'll show you shortly. I'm going to briefly pull us back to the United States chart. Here we have the progressions as at 27th of November this year. Now, when we progress a chart, we move one day forward in our ephemeris for every year that the country has existed. And so by this stage, in America's existence. The midheaven has moved from this early degree of Libra here and has moved all the way forwards to around 7.5 degrees of Gemini, which is here. The solar arc midheaven is not too far away either, to this sensitive point in America's chart. We were looking at America's 7th house a few minutes ago. This is the house of our relationships with other countries. Now in its natal mundane chart, the United States has got Uranus close to its 7th house cusp. It has Mars there too, and I think we'd probably anticipate from this duo that the United States is certainly going to have its share of military disputes. We may also project what is in the 7th house out onto other countries, and therefore we would see countries abroad as possibly being the offenders which require the United States to act. But in any event, this highly reactive Uranus on the angle is now going to be stimulated by the approaching progressed midheaven. It's just over a degree away as at this date in November, but this gap will be narrowing quite quickly over this coming year, and so abrupt changes in relationships with other countries is probable. The midheaven is a very sensitive point, and it can say something about leaders, government, rulers, and there could be some very quick and decisive reactions from rulers now. We can also see that the progressed moon in the United States chart is about to enter Aries. Aries is a much more fiery, independent, assertive, aggressive background energy, and this sign change is imminent. Now, as if there wasn't enough going on with the Pluto-Mars oppositions and the spring eclipse season starting up, we have quite a troublesome new moon coming at the end of April next year. Now, I've cast this new moon chart over the skies of Washington, D.C. I have just wanted to show you what the new moon energy was like. Now, new moons are very important when you're looking at how countries are behaving. The ingress charts, the eclipses, the new moon charts, these are all part of how we gather information about a nation's year ahead. You can see in this chart that Pluto and Mars are just a few minutes apart, and they are closely squaring this new moon at 7 degrees of Taurus. This is the third opposition that Pluto and Mars are making, and it's the final one. But it's woven into the new moon energy, and so it's telling us something about how this Pluto-Mars energy is going to affect the world. That inherent aggression, the potential for violence, for opposition and conflict, is woven into this new moon energy, and this new moon is going to fall somewhere in every country's chart around the world. New moons, in my opinion, are far more potent than full moons. So by this point, we have 3 important things, all unfolding over the course of March, April, May next year. If we turn now to NATO's natal chart, I think we can see here that potential for survival, for aggression. We have all these planets in Aries, Mercury, Mars, Venus and Sun. This is an organisation which is very much caught up with power. And we can also see from the position of the progressed Sun here that this organisation has been very lively over the last few years. But the NATO chart is being brought to life over the next year or two for other reasons as well. One of them will be those eclipses that we've been discussing, which fall at 9 degrees of Aries and at 24 degrees of Virgo. Of course, the 9-degree Aries eclipse is going to catch this NATO stellium in Aries, further emphasising the potential for conflict here. The lunar eclipse falls around 24 degrees of Virgo, so it's not too far from the ascendant, and will also be square to this moon and Uranus. So as you'll be picking up by now, the range of countries and organisations that are going to be impacted by the eclipses, by the Pluto-Mars oppositions, is quite extensive. Are there any other signs in this chart that we should be concerned? We can see that this progressed moon is also moving through Aries. This is the same position as the United States progressed moon, Aries energy, which is initiatory, independent, aggressive. But there are other signs too, and we can see that this solar arc, Mars and Venus, which are very tightly conjunct, are now passing over the area of this moon-Uranus conjunction. Mars and Uranus particularly are renowned for that potential for conflict, for sudden upsetting incidents. Solar arc Mercury is at around 19 degrees of Gemini, and so it's in the area of that midheaven already. Mercury is, of course, communication, processing, perhaps decisions or announcements which are going to be made to the world. And as we go into March of next year, we can see that transiting Saturn is going to pass over the 7th house cusp. It will square the midheaven, but it will then move on into a lengthier transit as it squares this moon-Uranus conjunction over the rest of the year. Now, I haven't yet settled on which chart I would prefer to use for the Russian Federation, but the chart of a leader will always reflect something about the country, because the fate of the country is intertwined with the leader whilst they are in power. And Putin's chart is showing us some quite noticeable themes, particularly in relation to Mars. Mars is the planet of war. And if we look at Putin's progressed chart for the 27th of November, we can see that his progressed sun is almost at 25.5 degrees of Sagittarius. And what this means is that it is bearing down on his natal Mars. Sun and Mars together are telling us something about decisions, acting out on our will, potentially about deciding whether to take action and aggress. Sometimes there can be haste and impulsivity, but certainly this is not a time in our life for stepping aside. If we believe our toes are being stepped on, we will act firmly. Putin's progressed Mars is almost at 20.5 degrees of Aquarius now. And so what that shows us is that he's reaching his North Node. This can be a time for expanding those Martian energies of aggression, of anger. But it also means his Mars is approaching the proposed IC for his birth chart. His birth time doesn't actually have an AA rating. This is the proposed chart for Putin. And it has seemed to work quite well over the years. But also consider this, that progressed Mars of Putin is gradually coming to oppose his natal Pluto. And so the signs of somebody who will not be backing down, who will take on conflict, who may even, over the course of time, be subject to violence himself. That huge Mars energy is lighting up this chart. We can see from Putin's natal Pluto-Mars trine that this is not a man who would be prepared to back away. There is an almost superhuman determination and ability to push for the things we want. Assuming Trump is successfully inaugurated, I wondered how his relationship with Putin might affect any burgeoning situation. The two men have certainly had interaction and they seem to be quite fascinated with each other. And so I thought we'd look at the composite chart to see if these two men would be able to use diplomacy to quell any escalating conflict, to negotiate a win-win situation if possible. This composite chart is not about the two men's individual planets and birth charts. It is telling us about the energy and the quality of the relationship between them, as though it had a life force and direction of its own, a separate entity. And here we have a Pluto-Sun conjunction. It's falling in the 11th house of the composite chart, and the 11th house is a very good position for the Sun because it's saying that there is the capacity to be friends. The 11th house is the house of friendship. It's also the house of aspirations and goals, and so if a relationship has a political purpose, then this is an auspicious sign that the two people would be able to retain some detachment and goodwill in the pursuit of shared goals and political aims. The addition of Pluto, however, brings a much more intense energy into this. Pluto is the transformer, the regenerator, a planet of great power and potentially power plays. And this is telling us that the relationship has a quality which will be profound. It will be life-altering for these two men. These regenerative effects of this Pluto energy may mean that the relationship needs to overhaul and transform, and sometimes the two people involved may not be sure whether that transformation will be so intense that the relationship is severed. But the conjunction also tells us that these two people together could, if they chose, use this power to successfully control other people. The energy could be directed outwards onto other people. This is because of the potential power that Pluto brings in. Pluto can also tell us something about deep psychology, the inner workings of our mind and emotions, and it may be that these two people have a deep insight into how the other one works, and in that case the Pluto involvement would mean that both people would be able to successfully work on themselves and their own deep drives. This does help us understand somewhat why there would be a potential fascination between the two. Other parts of the chart are telling us that emotionally there is not deep involvement. We can see that from the opposition to Venus and to Saturn. There may even not be emotional clarity always because Neptune is involved too, and Neptune can blur and deceive. In terms of communication between the two men, we have Mercury and Saturn together. Saturn can, of course, put brakes on. It can apply restrictions and suppress the energy of planets which it contacts. But as this relationship is not an emotional relationship, I think there could be some quite lively interchange here, but it will be structured, functional, designed to be impactful rather than a ready flow of chatter. And that may well indeed be adequate for the purposes that these two men need to interact. I have looked at a few of Trump's relationships with the key people around him, and I've had some of their analyses in my videos. And of the relationships that Trump has politically, this is not one of the stronger ones. There isn't an energy of huge warmth, of strong goodwill. The focus is more on a political relationship which might have far-reaching consequences. Here we have the composite chart of Elon Musk and Putin. There has been talk that these two men have already had certain conversations, and I wondered what the potential would be for this relationship to help any international friction. However, there are many difficulties and tensions caught up in the composite chart of these two, because the composite sun is in the 12th house. The 12th house is hidden, and it can also speak about unconscious psychological baggage that the two people can bring into a relationship. That's because the 12th is also a house of self-undoing, and it's the things that we aren't aware of about ourselves that can undermine us. And so if either of this pair have facets about their inner workings which they are not wholly conscious or honest about, they will bring the relationship down. Because we have Uranus too, this relationship could be a source of constant surprises. Uranus brings that unexpected energy, its drive for individuality, freedom at all costs, and its changefulness may mean that this is a relationship that cannot be taken for granted. It may well not be a long-lasting one. We do have Venus and Mercury around too, which may help a little, but I don't feel confident that this is going to be a relationship of longevity. Neither of these two may necessarily feel that they can bank on the other person. There is a certain amount of uncertainty, confusion. Saturn would like to know where it's at, what the shape and future of the relationship is, but Neptune will consistently undermine it. And even though this may not necessarily be a relationship that needs to have an emotional content, there are signs of tension here, of emotional volatility. Both parties may have difficulty in containing emotions and anger, and there simply aren't the volume of aspects, of interconnections and helpful house positions that would assist with this. Of the two charts, I think Trump's position would be slightly easier as a vehicle for diplomacy with Putin. And so we've come back full circle, and I've just put this chart up in the background while I recap. Until we'd experienced the first of those oppositions between Mars and Pluto, I wasn't sure how that energy would play out, or indeed how far-reaching it would be. I think many people were concerned that there may not even be an election in the United States, and we were all aware that the 3 successive Mars-Pluto oppositions would have a big impact. Now, I do personally suspect that Trump will be inaugurated, and as we pull into the early months of next year, there are 3 pivotal events to look out for. The first of these is the eclipses, which impact various countries in March of 2025. The second of these is a very difficult looking new moon, which falls towards the end of April 2025. The third of these relate to the Pluto-Mars oppositions. I would say that March, April, May next year could be hotspots. Thank you very much for watching. Something we need to be very aware of is that astrology is showing us potentials. I did previously do a video which covered the United States Mars return. I could see some conflict in it, and I was concerned about placing this into perspective. So I had also showed some historic charts of times of great conflict and a very heavy loss of life. At this stage, I'm not saying that this will be as severe. I'll put the link for the Mars return video in the description below this video. And I am also going to take a separate look at the United Kingdom, the UK's position over the next few months. And I'll have that one with you very shortly. Until then, take care and God bless you all.